snowbirds are flying north. According to a Southful real estate firm, a large number of Asian Canadians are emigrating from the nation. Because of the rising cost of living in the South, rising mortgage rates, and the weakening Canadian dollar, many snowbirds are thinking about selling their house. Well, there are two signs for sale south of the border. As political tensions and economic instability increase, a growing number of Canadian snowbirds are now packing up and moving permanently out of the United States. And snowbirds are escaping Canada's Sunshine State. Since so many Canadians are selling, I do have a lot more listings than normal. Boycotting the US has been a hot topic since US President Donald Trump was elected and made comments about Canada becoming the 51st state. Some Canadian snowbirds who visit Florida every year are pointing the finger at Donald Trump in an effort to sell their winter getaways. In just 6 months, Florida managed to preserve its most significant seasonal sector. It was destroyed. It wasn't a coincidence either. It was planned, deliberate, and masquerading as patriotism. A bill that lawmakers praised as a courageous move has turned into a financial catastrophe, one that has already cost Florida's economy over $6 billion. It's not a typo. There have been reports of that decline. One of the most stupid pieces of legislation in the state's recent history caused a complete collapse in employment, income, and property values. Even worse, everyone was expecting it. This is more than just a real estate tale. It isn't related to travel. It's about how short-term politics can ruin long-term success. How one ideological stunt shakes up local businesses, and how thousands of Florida businesses are currently suffering as a result, while the politicians who started it pretend nothing is wrong. Now, click like if you think economic policy should be based on facts rather than rhetoric. Feel free to subscribe if you truly want to understand the mechanisms behind financial disasters like this, as the situation in Florida is more complicated than the headline. For many years, a very specific engine drove Florida's winter economy: Canadian snowbirds. In exchange for 6 months of Sunday, tens of thousands of pensioners from Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, and other locations traveled south each November to avoid the snow. But these were no ordinary tourists. For the weekend, they made no reservations for lodging. They bought homes, they paid property taxes, they shopped at Publix, saw local doctors, hired contractors, and went to the same diners every morning. According to Statistics Canada, the typical Canadian snowbird household spends more than $33,000 during a single Florida winter. This covers money for rent, groceries, meals, healthcare, housekeeping, and other costs. It sustains thousands of jobs in a quiet, consistent, and reliable manner. Now compare that to the average American domestic traveler. A family on a brief vacation spends about $1,200. That's all. Therefore, to match the value of a single Canadian snowbird household, Florida would need to attract roughly 28 domestic tourist families. 28. The math is easy. Snowbirds are not merely tourists. They form the basis of the economy. For decades, Florida dealt with them in this manner. That changed in 2025. By January, red flags were everywhere. Winter rental reservations dropped 31%. Canada has seen a 45% drop in Florida real estate searches. Air travel between Canada and Florida fell 38% in the past year. Silently, people were pulling out as usual. But instead of resolving the issue, Florida's legislature made it worse. Senate Bill 264 is a match. SB 264 was designed to protect property from external factors. In reality, it sparked suspicions against all non-American property owners, including tens of thousands of Canadians who had long resided in Florida. The result was the same, even though the law didn't specifically target them. Suddenly, snowbirds were prohibited, their property ownership was questioned, and their investments were at risk. Then things got worse. A new rule required registration, fingerprinting, and background checks for any Canadian who planned to stay in Florida for more than 30 days. Indeed, precisely. A retired couple from Montreal who bought a condo in Naples in 1994 were abruptly required to get fingerprinted in order to enjoy their annual winter vacation. It didn't matter that they paid taxes. It didn't matter that they owned real estate. The rules were changed. The confidence was betrayed. Thousands of people began selling in Canada, some in silence, some in rage. Listings jumped. One South Florida real estate agent said, I've never seen this much Canadian inventory on the market. People have just finished. The numbers back it up. The number of Canadian property listings from owners rose from a few per quarter to over 18 in highly seasonal areas in a matter of months. And it wasn't the only one. It was widespread both on the east and west coasts and inland. And the repercussions begin immediately. Nearby businesses that previously profited greatly from snowbird travel saw a 30%, 50%, and in many cases 70% decline in revenue. Restaurants were only half full during what should have been the busiest season. Suddenly, the lobbies of medical clinics that once saw dozens of Canadian patients each week were empty. I used to see 25 to 30 Canadian patients each week, a doctor from Fort Myers told the Miami Herald. Now, maybe 6. Furthermore, rather than being anecdotal, that breakdown is systemic. The $6 billion in lost economic activity includes $2.1 billion in property tax revenue. This suggests less funding for schools, emergency services, infrastructure, and public salaries. Cities such as Fort Lauderdale, Naples, and Sarasota developed their budgets assuming that snowbird revenues would continue to flow in. Legislators used to grin and cite tourism statistics when you questioned them about it, but now they are focusing on deficits. It's okay, they said. The number of domestic trips has grown. That is true in theory, but it is also futile, since you cannot expect the economy to thrive by replacing long-term valuable residents with transient beachgoers. Tourists don't buy roofs. They don't hire electricians. They don't build relationships with physical therapists, dentists, or housekeepers. For 6 months of the year, entire communities are not kept up. They take a selfie and leave after 5 days. So, while politicians stood in press conferences celebrating a fake Florida victory, business owners watched their client lists disappear. Nothing was done by the local contractors. Part-time employees' shifts were cancelled. Usually reserved units were occupied quickly by property managers, 1 year in advance. It's not just bad economics, it's delusional. As you watch this, you might be asking yourself, how did no one stop this? Click the like button because what comes next is even more incredible. This is not a story about a downturn. It describes a deliberate choice to forgo a decades-old economic engine in favor of appearing powerful and to trade dollars for recognition. Now, it is up to the people who built their lives and businesses around that engine to pick up the pieces. In Florida, the effects were not just monetary, they were also intimate. Waitresses at waterfront restaurants discovered that half of their tables were suddenly empty. The roofers and house painters did not call back. The appointment books of physical therapists who have been building relationships with snowbirds for decades are abruptly disappearing. These weren't numbers on a chart. One bad policy ruined livelihoods, routines, and lives. Politicians, however, remain steadfast in their belief that the Canadian market will come back. They say, it always does. But this time, it didn't, because there had been a change in both the economy and emotions. Once Florida crossed the line, the message was irrevocable. For many years, snowbirds have felt a connection to the community. They weren't strangers, no. They were neighbors who sponsored minor league teams, went to town hall meetings, and gave to local charities. They continued to have a prosperous winter trade. But when Senate Bill 264 was approved and fingerprint laws went into effect, something went wrong. It broke the implicit understanding that you and your money are welcome. Furthermore, people leave rather than argue when trust is lost. The sell-off was swift. Listings surged. In Q1 alone, there were 400% more Canadian-owned properties on the market, according to one Fort Lauderdale agent. Instead of having seasonal residents, entire condominium complexes turned into ghost villages. Retirees from Ontario and Quebec were now looking for ways out of Florida after spending 15, 20, and even 30 winters there. It gets even worse at this point. They made new investments rather than just walking away, but not in Florida. The first to move with almost surgical precision was Mexico. For a maximum of 180 days, they allowed Canadians to enter the nation without a visa. No paperwork, no fingerprints, no suspicion, just respect, sun, and sand. But they didn't end there. Mexico,